Hello, I'm Tom. This is Tabletop Tap Room. Today we are looking at what might have been missed about domain play by some of the more modern systems. And we're also going to look at the comparison and contrast between AD&D's domain play and Star Frontiers. And I think there's some interesting correlations. So let's get right to it. All right, before we get too far, just let me say thanks for watching the video. Thanks to my subscribers. You guys are great. And don't forget that like, subscribe, and bell icon. Now, in Dungeons & Dragons, my reading of domain play is that it served several purposes simultaneously. It was the deliberate change in scale of the game. And the strongest evidence for that is the structure of the rules themselves. So when you reach name level in AD&D, fighter's a lord, magic user's a wizard, you can build a stronghold. We'll just call it a stronghold because wizard, it's a tower. Cleric, it's a a chapel or a religious center type thing. Thief, it's the thieves guild. So we're just going to say stronghold. But by doing this, you had followers who would come. And you didn't have to pay them. So to be able to get them, you had to shell out the money, and it was expensive. It was very expensive. And Eric Tenkar actually really did a video recently where it was the barony, a starting fighter's barony. The math just didn't support it. You weren't going to get ahead with the barony. You were going to have to keep adventuring. So it's very expensive to get this started, but you get these followers who you don't have to pay. They're fanatically loyal, and you don't have to pay them. They just show up and they want to serve you. But to get that, you have to build the stronghold, and it starts a new role for the character. It's now a social role. You're interacting with other lords. You're interacting with the heads of religious organizations and factions, and it changes the dynamic of the game while also providing a sink for all that treasure, all that gold for XP that you've been accumulating. So it really changes the scale of the game. At low levels, and you say you're an adventurer, but at name level, you become a person of consequence. An adventurer just goes out and they go on adventures. They might be the hero. They might have a bard singing songs about them and all that. But when you become a lord, when you become a wizard that attracts apprentices, or you become the Thieves Guild master, you are now a person of consequence. If a siege is facing a city, okay, the religious leader, the top religious leader, the master of the Thieves Guild, the lord of the city, the head wizard in that town, they're all going to get together and they're going to be like, all right, we got this problem, and they're going to be discussing it. They are the ones who are going to be establishing policy and what gets done about problems facing the city. So it really is a change of scale. It's a conceptual jump that Gary made. This is probably the most important piece of the context is that Gary might have been linking it back to its wargaming roots, because in wargaming, you have a character who has who's the general, who has you'll have some sort of leader. I remember my first war game, I had a colonel who was directing 2 regiments of cavalry, and so you had followers, and we were fighting over territory, and it was 7 years war. It was hooked. I was hooked for wargaming after that. But with an adventurer, you have 1 miniature equals 1 character, and maybe you don't play with miniatures, you do theater of the mind. It's still the same idea. It's the 1 character, but eventually when they get a stronghold, it's 1 character attracts followers and a stronghold and territory and an army, and it opens up play to move back to the wargaming roots. And honestly, I think you could actually have armies fighting armies and still do it theater of the mind, where you just focus on individual scenes that the character is affecting within their immediate area. So, and Professor Dungeon Master has shown in his module Macbeth. There's a whole battle going on, and the characters have a role to play within the battle. And so I thought the way he did that was rather inspired. Now, so Gary wasn't just saying, all right, you can have a castle because medieval fantasy ought to have castles. I think it was part of his conception of what a fantasy campaign could become. Okay, and it solves some problems. Solve the what happens after you become powerful problem. It's perhaps the cleverest aspect of it. Imagine a fighter who's reached 9th level, and he's extremely good at killing monsters, but the only thing the game offers him is bigger monsters. Now we're going after this huge ancient red dragon, and wait, I heard about this thing called the Tarrasque. Maybe we should bring that up. And so it solves the problem. What do you do with high level characters? Because it really is just going to get boring. All right, we're trotting out this demon today. We're trotting out this thing today. So advancement becomes increasingly difficult to make meaningful under those circumstances. But Gygax's solution was essentially give the character something new to be responsible for. And, if you go into a dungeon and come back out and find out, hey, the other Baron raided your town and carried off your people, that's a problem. And it's personal because those are your people. And he killed your people, and he then took all the villagers in the town away as slaves. Those were your people. So it's the magic user has apprentices, the religious leader. You have a master criminal organization. The game expands the definition of power. And this is why I think domain play is actually slightly misleading of a term. When we talk about Gary's original conception, the deeper concept is social power. That the high level character is now delving into social dynamics and social power that you just don't get when it's hey, what's up, ghoul? It's different. So the stronghold gives the character something to do with their treasure. And that's an enormous clue as to what domain play is about. The early D&D system was based on treasure for XP. You acquire gold, you get experience, you level up. Eventually, you have an absurd amount of gold in the loan bank there at the Caves of Chaos. So what happens next? And Gygax gives the players somewhere to put it. Castle isn't just the reward, it's a sink for the accumulated wealth. More importantly, it's a productive sink, okay? Because the castle begins to produce. You have serfs, you have peasants, you have villagers, and economic concerns, and gold begins to be generated by this stronghold. And it's no longer, I'm going to spend gold for an increasingly more expensive magic sword. It's, and frankly, the buy, sell, and trade of magic items tends to put me off a little bit. I didn't like that feature about 3.5 when I came back to D&D. That just, it's just buy, sell, and trade magic items. It just seemed wrong somehow to me. But because, we were always like, I have a +2 sword now. I'm going to give this +1 sword to my henchman. And so I don't think we ever really sold swords back in the day at my table. So a fighter's freehold or stronghold will generate revenue through trade and tariffs and taxes. And the followers uh, are actually more important than the castle. This is the part I think that gets overlooked. If domain play were merely about giving characters a cool castle, Gygax would have stopped there. But the rules give high-level characters people. And that means the player's sphere of agency expands. It's no longer, what can I personally accomplish? It's, what can I cause other people to accomplish? That's an enormous change. And the fighter can now send his men-at-arms somewhere to do something. You might even have your men-at-arms being like, hey, like the Roman army, we're gonna build a road here, paved stone. We're gonna get this. We're gonna hire the dwarven stonemasons, and I'm gonna put some of my men-at-arms to work building this road, because that will mean more travel, more caravans, more merchant, more opportunity to tax. So it certainly, it becomes something that you can do, and you can change and build the world around you. There's also a very Gygaxian element of risk to domain plays. You know, congratulations, you're rich and powerful. Here's your castle. No, no, no. The castle is a target. Once you own land, people can attack it. Well, once you have followers, they can be killed. Once you have income, somebody can try to steal it. And once you have political influence, somebody else can oppose you. In other words, power creates vulnerability. And high-level characters who transition to domain play, and I know a lot of people didn't bother with it. They just played their character until they stopped playing them. But this makes the character vulnerable again. He's got stakes in the world, and he's got a location, an Achilles heel, if you will, where he can be stung. You know, he can't really be harmed because he's, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th level, whatever. But, and that's powerful, but somebody could come at him where he's weaker, his Achilles heel. Where he's only got a 6th level Castellan, managing his castle for him, and 3rd level lieutenants, and then a bunch of 1st level men-at-arms at the castle. Those are easier to attack than attacking the character directly. And if you had upset a lich or a dragon, they might choose to take out their vengeance on the player character by going after something he values, and that makes him vulnerable. And I like that. It gives the player character, the player, something to worry about. What's going to happen to my domain while I'm away adventuring halfway around the world, or on the elemental plane of fire, going to the city of brass? What could happen while I'm away doing these things? I don't know. I got to worry about that. Who knows? It makes the world matter to the players. This is where I think domain play becomes philosophically interesting. Before the stronghold, the player can approach the setting like a tourist. What's over there? After establishing a domain, it's what's happening over there. How does it affect me? And I have a really great illustration of this. When I attended my senior year of high school, I attended a school run by the Department of Defense on a military installation in Europe. And my government teacher, his name was Mr. McCullough, and he had this term, Bubis Americanus. And we began to learn, he would use this term, and we began to learn what it meant. It basically translated stupid American tourist. He did not like Bubis Americanus. And he was famous for denigrating Bubis Americanus. And to graduate from Lake and Heath High School, you had to get through government class. In fact, he said that to us. He goes. He was also the senior class advisor, which meant he was going to chaperone us on our class trip, which happened to be to Stratford-upon-Avon to see a Shakespearean play in the theater there in Shakespeare's birthplace. And so he warned us. He goes, if you act like Bubis Americanus, and embarrass me in public, I will fail you. And you had to pass government to be able to graduate from the school. So it was like a real threat. And I don't know if he ever followed through on that at any time. And I imagine he made the same threat every year. And now the funny part is that here we are all living in England. And so we're on this class trip and we dressed appropriately as we were told, dress a little nicer, don't be wearing and so you go to the play and you have the first half, they have intermission, you go out to the lobby, and they have drinks and refreshments. And we're me and my friends are standing together in the lobby and we're looking over and we see this kid, maybe 19, our age, maybe 19, maybe 20. He's wearing some faded corduroys with worn out knees and a Mickey Mouse t-shirt that was a little faded. He didn't look good. And so we all looked at him and then we all looked at each other and we all said in unison, Bubis Americanus. And it was different for us because we are now living in this country and we've been put on notice not to be these stupid American tourists. And so we began to feel like we belong here, despite the fact we didn't belong there, because the British were famous for calling you Yanks. And, now if it was somebody who'd been through World War II and he called you Yankee, there'd be some affection in it and you'd be okay with that. Yeah, but then you'd see the punk goth kid, maybe in Bury St. Edmunds, and he hey, Yank, might include you're number one as well. But you knew he meant it as an insult. And so, but we were very sensitive to this idea that we live here now, and it's this is our place. We belong here, and we didn't appreciate Bubis Americanus coming in and embarrassing us. We did not appreciate that at all. And so it changes when you are no longer a tourist in the world. It changes how you feel about the world. And so when the player character has a stake in the world, a stronghold, he has people, he has an economic concern, it changes how he feels about the world. Now, how does all of this connect to Star Frontiers? In AD&D, you had a character who got a stronghold, who got followers, who had a domain. In Star Frontiers, you have a character who eventually gets a starship, attracts a crew, and he has an enterprise. Now, if it's a freighter, he's in the freighting business. If it's a mining ship, he's going out to the asteroid belt, mining, prospecting and mining. Or it could be an ag ship, an agricultural ship, and they're growing crops and selling them. There's also some provision in the rules there because you have information on putting in a first-class booth, a second-class booth, or journey class cold storage where you're putting a suspended animation, basically freeze field technology in Star Frontiers, and transported, in the like a coffin, basically, to the next system where you're woken up and then you go about your business. And so there's some provision for that. So it could even be a Starliner or just like Firefly, a freighter that takes on passengers. Because you have a few berths that you can, sell. And so there's some provision for that. You could even, in theory, have a privateer, and it's a mercenary vessel, and you're looking to take mercenary contracts. There's less support for that. The game, you're rolling on tables to see what cargoes are available. You're rolling on tables to see what was discovered during prospecting, and then you mine it. You're rolling on, and then there's additional tables in Dragon Magazine for agricultural goods. The rare wines and ready cash article comes to mind. The tote that barge article comes to mind. So there's a lot of support for that type of play, and it mirrors what is going on with domain play in AD&D. Both games give the player an asset that expands their agency beyond the individual character. The castle isn't merely transportation or equipment, and the ship isn't merely transportation or equipment. Both are platforms for high-level play. And this actually brings us to the high-level cost of starship skills in the original game rules. I am famous for saying, hey, that Star Frontiersman article, Spacer Skills Revisited, that lowers the entry point into starship skills. That's what's going to be that's house rule for my campaign. And I've actually changed the article even more to it's not no longer a progressive. You got to keep increasing these prerequisites. You just get the initial prerequisite to get first level, and then you can advance anything you want as you want. And because I just thought, hey, players want to be able to fly the Millennium Falcon. They don't want to wait through a whole, going to the equivalent of 9th level, 10th level, like in AD&D, to be able to get that spaceship. They want it earlier, and it's more fun to do it that way. So I've always done it that way, but mechanically, there was a mechanical trade-off. There was mechanical gatekeeping in AD&D and in Star Frontiers, which gatekeeped domain play until a certain point, till high level. And so, you couldn't attract followers as a fighter, even if you had built a tower or a keep or a castle, until a certain level. And Star Frontiers spaceship skills, spacer skills required 6th level Alpha Dawn skill prerequisites. And so that made it really tough to climb. And of course, one of the things they did to with the bundled module in the Nighthawks game was you just hand waved. You're starting with first level spacer skill. You have all of the prerequisites that are required. Could be 1 or 2 skills. One of them would be at 6th level, without a doubt. But I found that introduced power creep and created, one-hit wonders. If you've got 6th level skill, that's really something. That kind of makes you, one roll done. I did the thing. Okay, if you were a beam, if you had 6th level laser skill, all right, I'm setting my laser to 20 or 10 if it's a pistol, and a one shot, boom, guy's dead. Very few people can survive being shot with a laser on 10 or 20. And so, of course, it is fun sometimes to shoot people with a laser set on 10 or 20 and watch the results. But that's neither here nor there. So I think that that this might be an explanation for why they made spacer skills so difficult to obtain, because it was that mechanical gatekeeping that reserved domain play as it exists in Star Frontiers for high-level characters to change the nature of the game. With an asset like this, like a castle or a spaceship, the character it costs money. It generates money. It requires personnel. It creates obligations. It creates opportunities. It attracts enemies. It gives the player status, and it opens up new kinds of adventures. One thing to remember is that the rules for domain play were relatively thin in AD&D compared to how important the concept appears to be. So I don't think that Gary was trying to give you a complete simulation. I think he was just putting a framework in place, and that's what we see at Star Frontiers with the rules for prospecting and mining. If you have a mine ship, the ag ship, there's not a lot there. For that, it's just that you grow the crop and save, I think, 10% to replant and sell off the rest, and then you replant and grow the crop again. And I think it's like on a monthly basis, so it's every month you're growing a crop and selling off the excess. But and then the freight rules. Again, it's just a framework for getting cargoes and transporting them someplace and selling them. And you know that along the way, there's going to be passengers. Somebody wants to hire the ship to transport them to a new system, you know, all sorts of things, pirates. But that has to go back to the game master, and it goes back to the imaginative framework of your game. You know, the groundwork of your game. What you guys have been imagining, and so I think that Gary was trying to introduce, here's the level of responsibility, not 47 tables for actually calculating grain yield on your eastern province, or it's just enough in Star Frontiers that you could run a commerce campaign. That's what we have referred to it. But I think recognizing it as analogous to domain play in AD&D is one way to look at it, that this is for high level play. And maybe you do allow spacer skills earlier, because a historical example always stood out to me, that because one, Nighthawks was kind of based off of World War II ship combat. And the United States military took a farm boy from Iowa, 18 years old, and trained him to operate guns on a battleship. And so the analogy would be that brand new starting character should be able to learn to operate the guns on a space battleship. But that's not how it actually worked in the original game. And so I know that even though I'm talking about commerce campaigns and domain play with spaceships, that it's actually possible to trip into that a little earlier for the player characters than would normally happen, say, in AD&D, where you have to reach 9th, 10th level. You got to reach name level, and then you can begin attracting followers because you're building a stronghold. One last thing to consider is that Gary didn't necessarily expect the player to stop adventuring. You have an adventurer who becomes a lord, and then it's retirement. No, it was an adventurer who becomes a lord, but he's also an adventuring lord. The fighter may still have a castle and can still go into a dungeon. And by going into the dungeon, it's because something matters to his domain. He's looking for an artifact. He's trying to solve a problem. There's been a monster that's been attacking his people. He might need treasure to rebuild walls that were demolished in the recent war. He might need to rescue an ally. One of his henchmen's been kidnapped or captured and is a prisoner somewhere, and he's got to go and rescue the guy. He might simply be unable to delegate the particular problem facing his domain, so he's going to handle it himself. What's really interesting here is that in early D&D play, the dungeon is everything. You're going into the dungeon because that's where the treasure is. That's where the mission goes. And so the dungeon stops being the character's whole world with domain play. The character now has a world of his own. That comparison also works for Nighthawks. The character's world is this ship. This is his ship. This is his domain. This is his fiefdom. He's in charge of this, and he's got to keep it running, and he's going to, keep it making money, so he can pay off the banknotes, so he can pay for overhauls and pay for fuel. And one little analogy to the fighters, the followers that the AD&D characters get that they don't have to pay for, is that robots. You could have a bevy of robots that you have collected over time, and you keep them on the ship. So you might have a half dozen security robots. You might have a butler robot, a service robot that takes care of cooking and cleaning the ship, cleaning your stuff, lays out your uniform. you could have a collection of robots. You're not paying them a wage. You just got to keep them maintained. So if you have technicians, robotic skill, you do that yourself, or you might hire a robotics specialist or the ship's engineer, because robotics is a prerequisite for ship engineering skill, starship engineering skill. Would be the guy handling that for you as well. So I really think that understanding starship ownership for the player characters in the terms of domain play really makes sense, especially when you consider that there was that mechanical gatekeeping that prevented you from getting a ship until you were a high-level character. And I know the trend has been to bring those prerequisites down and make it much easier. I'm certainly guilty of that. But now it has me thinking, wow, this is when a Star Frontiers game would really transition, where you as a ship captain would begin to negotiate with executives from one of the megacorps, because they want something. They need your ship for a reason. So you're now executing a contract and negotiating with them. Well, we want this and we want that. And they're like, no, you can't have that. So that brings in a different social dynamic. Or you're negotiating with a leader from one of the factions, from one of the cadres, the Silver Death Cult, or Alliance for the Rights of the People, one of the other cadres that were introduced in Dragon magazine or in Zebulon's Guide. So, or even just a rich guy who's like, yeah, my daughter was on this expedition. They haven't come back. We haven't heard from them. I'll pay you to go. I will pay the mortgage on your ship for 1 month, plus this much more, and a bonus if you bring her back alive. So, well, geez, yeah, let's do that. That sounds like a good deal. And you might negotiate with them, and we want a free overhaul. Yeah. Oh, wait, that's dangerous. We really need the ship to be upgraded with a new laser battery. So you all right, the guy says, all right, fine, I will buy a new laser battery and have it installed in your ship, and I'll pay the mortgage for 1 month, and and then here's the amount of money for you over and above that, because you got to get paid. Yes. And bonus if you manage to find the MacGuffin or my daughter or whatever it is that I want that's on that planet outside of the regular spaceways of the frontier. So it begins to change things for the player characters. The characters begin to transform through domain play, from people participating in the setting to people who have an ongoing stake in the economic agency within the setting. And it changes power dynamics as well. This is Tom for Tabletop Taproom and the Star Frontiers Gamer. Hope you've enjoyed this video. That's my take on domain play. Did you play domain play? Say something in the comments. I would like to hear about it. Or maybe there's an aspect of domain play you just don't like. Like to hear about that as well. And don't forget that like, subscribe, and bell icon really helps with the algorithm. And I will see you at the gaming table.